In the news tonight, His Majesty stresses the need to step up efforts to protect Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, preserve the rights and Arab identity of Jerusalemites, and stand by their side against Israeli pressures. The global chemical arms watchdog says Syria has shipped about a third of its chemical weapons stockpile, including mustard gas for destruction abroad. And the Russian president says he would use force in Ukraine only as a last resort, easing fears that East-West tension over the former Soviet republic could lead to war. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King called for maximizing the values of tolerance, fraternity and coexistence among Muslims and Christians, stressing the role of the Church in promoting Muslim-Christian dialogue and common denominators between the heavenly faiths. Welcoming the Latin Patriarch of the Holy Land in Jordan, Fuad Atwal, the King emphasized the need to step up efforts to protect Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, preserve the rights and Arab identity of Jerusalemites, and stand by their side against Israeli pressures. His Majesty commended the efforts of the Patriarch and the Church in safeguarding the rights of Christians in Jerusalem and spreading the message of love and peace in the region. Swal lauded the King's tireless endeavors to bring about a just and comprehensive peace in the Middle East, as well as his continued support for Christians in Jordan, Palestine, and the region at large. Dozens of Palestinians marched through the Gazan city of Beit Hanun during the funeral procession of an activist killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Strip yesterday. 2 Palestinians were killed in the airstrike, and the Israeli military said the 2 men had been preparing to launch a rocket across the border. Palestinian sources said the 24-year-old was killed in the strike, and a second man later died of his wounds. And in Bahrain, mourners gathered for the funeral of Ammar Abdurrahman Ali, one of 3 policemen killed yesterday in the western village of Diye. The explosion that killed the 3 policemen occurred as hundreds marched in a procession to mark the final day of mourning for a man who died in custody last week. The Interior Ministry said the detained man, accused of smuggling weapons, had died of an illness. Over to Syria, where gunfire crackled and warplanes buzzed overhead as Syria's military fought today to take the town of Yabrod near the Lebanese border. Journalists were given a state-led tour of government-held areas around Yabrod, including Al-Sahl, which the army took this week. Buildings in the town appeared undamaged and electricity was running, but shops were closed and the streets empty except for Syrian soldiers who patrolled with assault rifles. Thousands of people fled Yabrod, a town of an estimated 40 to 50,000 north of Damascus and the surrounding areas, after it was bombed and shelled last month. Yabrod is also near the main highway linking Damascus to Aleppo in the north and to the Mediterranean coast in the west. Yesterday, 17 rebels and 15 government forces were killed in fighting in and around Yabrod. Meanwhile, Syria has shipped about a third of its chemical weapons stockpile, including mustard gas for destruction abroad. A spokesman for the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons confirmed 2 more shipments headed for the northern Syrian port of Latakia to be transferred to the U.S. ship MV Cape Ray and commercial destruction facilities in the UK and Germany. Michael Owen said Damascus had now handed over 6 consignments of the toxic agents it declared to the OPCW, adding that it plans to remove all the remaining chemicals out of the country before the end of April.
As far as the time which will be needed to actually destroy those chemicals, the U.S. has put a time frame of 45 to 90 days. And basically, the difference depends on how calm the seas are. That vessel is going to be destroying the chemicals on the high seas. And if there's calm seas, then they will be able to run those hydrolysis units around the clock and perhaps finish the job as soon as 45 days.
4 Iraqi policemen were killed when gunmen in military uniform broke into the city council and courthouse in Samarra in northern Iraq, holding the facility for 4 hours until police and army stormed the compound. The policemen were killed in the fighting, along with 3 civilians who were shot when Iraqi security forces opened fire to retake the site. Another 47 people were wounded, most of them soldiers and policemen. The gunmen, dressed in military uniform, who had holed up in the building, detonated their suicide vests after a 4th blew himself up at the entrance of the compound. And as policemen raced to help the victims, a suicide bomber detonated an explosives-rigged vehicle from the site. Egyptian Armed Forces Chief Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has sent the clearest signal yet that he will run for president, saying he cannot ignore the demands of the majority. Sisi, who is widely expected to win the presidency, was speaking at a graduation ceremony at the Cairo War College. Sisi, who ousted President Mohamed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood in July, said official procedures concerning his candidacy were expected in the coming days. Most Egyptians regard him as a decisive figure who can end the political turmoil that has gripped Egypt, but opponents hold him responsible for what human rights groups say are widespread abuses. Russia said it had successfully test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile with tensions high over its seizure of control in the Crimea and its threat to send more forces to its neighbor, Ukraine. However, in a speech today defending his country's actions in Crimea, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he would use force only as a last resort. His remarks came amid warnings by the United States and its Western allies to Moscow to either pull back its troops or face economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Here's more on today's events.
Russian President Vladimir Putin softened his stance on Crimea, saying military force in the eastern region of neighboring Ukraine is not his first option, but a last resort. Putin's comment may have been designed to lower East-West tensions over fears of a war in the former Soviet Republic, though he warned that sanctions under consideration against Russia would be counterproductive.
What can be a reason to use the armed forces? This is, of course, the last resort. Simply the last resort.
On the ground, however, tensions remained high, with Russian forces firing warning shots in a confrontation with Ukrainian servicemen, and Russian Navy ships were reported to have blockaded the straits separating the Ukrainian Black Sea Peninsula from Russia. Heavily armed soldiers in camouflage fatigues and face masks continued to surround a Ukrainian military base about 50 kilometers from Simferopol. Meanwhile, Washington and its Western allies are exerting pressure on Moscow to pull back its troops or face economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation. U.S. President Barack Obama ridiculed Putin's justification for any Russian military action in the Crimea region of southern Ukraine.
I actually think that this has not been a sign of strength, but rather is a reflection that countries near Russia have deep concerns and suspicions about this kind of meddling, and if anything, it will push many countries further away from Russia.
Visiting Kyiv to show support for Ukraine's new leaders, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry condemned Russia's act of aggression in Ukraine's Crimea region and said Moscow was looking for a pretext to invade more of the country. During his visit, Kerry announced an economic package and technical assistance for Ukraine. The U.S. administration would work with Congress to approve $1 billion in loan guarantees to help reduce the impact on Ukrainians of proposed energy subsidy cuts, as Kyiv seeks international financial assistance to avert bankruptcy. The United States will also send technical experts to Ukraine to advise its central bank and finance ministry on how to deal with the country's economic challenges and help combat corruption. Faraj Looney with the news at 10.
A new deadly winter storm has hit the U.S. East Coast with freezing rain, snow, and near-record cold. Parts of the Niagara Falls between the United States and Canada froze. The sub-freezing temperatures of minus 18 degrees Celsius has caused thousands of flights to be cancelled, shutting down Washington and closing schools and local government. And while freeze warnings were in place from the Canadian border into Texas, for many tourists such weather did not put them off from visiting the world-famous destination to enjoy a spectacular view of a frozen Niagara Falls. To Paris Fashion Week and Chanel's Autumn-Winter 2014 ready-to-wear show. The French capital's Grand Palais was transformed into the Chanel shopping center, stocked with thousands of luxurious food items, including Tweed Cola and Chanel pots of paint. The models brought an element of normality to the catwalk as they browsed the Chanel store in their luxurious orange, green, and baby pink outfits. Clothes were accessorized with oversized bug sunglasses, bulky pearl necklaces, handbags encased in shopping baskets, and fishnet black gloves. A bright yellow coat was worn over black leather trousers, orange sneakers, and paired with black chunky headphones and a metal chain. In an earlier show, Lebanese designer Elisa presented a sleek and sophisticated autumn-winter collection. Full-length evening dresses swept along the catwalk, along with sharp jumpsuits, floral mini dresses, and fur coats. Midnight colors in various shades of burgundy, black, emerald green, as well as pale rose were on display. Clothes were matched with richly colored accessories, including metallic clutch bags, black waist belts, and snake skin heels. Today marks 100 days until the 2014 World Cup gets underway in Brazil. A countdown clock at Rio de Janeiro's Copacabana beach read 100 days and also displayed the hours and minutes until the first game in Sao Paulo on June 12 at 5 p.m. local time between host Brazil and Croatia. Later today, Rio's iconic Maracana Stadium will be lit up in Brazil's green and yellow colors to commemorate the landmark day. Brazil is racing against time to complete stadiums, airports, communications infrastructure, and transportation systems as the opening day approaches. But FIFA has said it is confident all will be ready come game day. Barcelona captain Carles Puyol will leave the club at the end of the season following a persistent battle with a knee injury. The 35-year-old defender, a fan's favorite for his battling displays, has been restricted to just 5 league games this season and has decided to end his time at Camp Nou. Puyol, who made his Barca debut in 1999, has the second highest number of appearances for the club with 593, only bettered by Xavi Hernandez.
The reason we called you in was because I want to announce my retirement at the end of this season. The club knows and we agree on the terms. We will end my contract and cancel the 2 years I had left.
And finally, cold weather continues tonight with northwesterly light winds. As for tomorrow, a slight rise in temperature is expected, creating warm weather in most regions, while winds will be southwesterly moderate to brisk. The Gulf of Aqaba can expect fair conditions tonight and relatively hot tomorrow, with northerly moderate to brisk winds and slightly choppy seas. The weatherman warns of poor visibility due to dust. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty stresses the need to step up efforts to protect Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, preserve the rights and Arab identity of Jerusalemites, and stand by their side against Israeli pressures. The global chemical arms watchdog says Syria has shipped about a third of its chemical weapons stockpile, including mustard gas, for destruction abroad. And the Russian president says he would use force in Ukraine only as a last resort, easing fears that East-West tension over the former Soviet Republic could lead to war. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.